Former U.S. President Donald Trump braces for a potential indictment over classified documents seized at his Mar-a-Lago, Florida estate. And the Republican field grows larger in the 2024 presidential race, with former Vice President Mike Pence announcing he will challenge his former boss. Hello, I'm Arnold Neidem, and this is The Heat. We will have more on the 2024 U.S. presidential race and the Republican field later in the program. But we begin with the federal investigation into U.S. former President Donald Trump. Prosecutors with the U.S. Justice Department have officially notified Trump's legal team that he is the subject of their federal investigation. We begin with this report from CGTN's Jim Spellman in Washington, D.C.
Embattled former U.S. President Donald Trump has been issued a target letter from the Department of Justice, officially informing him he is the subject of a federal criminal investigation into his handling of classified documents. A target letter often comes before prosecutors file charges.
It's a term used in the Department of Justice manual, means substantial evidence linking a person, a putative defendant, to a crime.
DOJ Special Counsel Jack Smith leads the classified documents probe and investigations into events related to the 2020 election that Trump says was rigged. No evidence has surfaced to back those claims. Several state-level investigations are also underway. Multiple people close to the former president have spoken to prosecutors and grand juries. Perhaps most troubling for Trump, U.S. media report his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, has testified before a grand jury.
In terms of both of these investigations, whether it's the classified documents case or the January 6th probe and the plot to overturn the 2020 election, he was a central figure in both. And so if he is cooperating in either of those or both of those investigations, then that would definitely spell trouble for Donald Trump.
The target letter opens the door to Trump testifying before a grand jury, if he chooses, ahead of any potential charges being filed.
It is Department of Justice policy to allow a defendant who's gotten a target letter to testify if he or she requests it. I can't imagine in this case that it would be in President Trump's interest to testify.
Trump denies any wrongdoing and has attacked various prosecutors, judges, and the FBI. But some observers say indictments are inevitable.
Many more indictments to come, whether it's in the state of Georgia or at the federal level. There's so many legal issues that he has out there pending. I think he's clearly on the defensive.
Potential charges could be filed in Washington, D.C. or in the state of Florida, where Trump resides and where sensitive documents were found. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
For more now on Trump's legal investigations, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Eleanor Clift. She's a political columnist for the Daily Beast. Rafael Bernal is a staff writer for the political newspaper The Hill. Also with us is Melik Abdul. He is a radio host and Republican strategist. And from Decatur, Georgia, Bill Crane is a political analyst and columnist. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Bill Crane, the former president, Donald Trump, is facing a host of legal challenges. And all this, of course, happening while he's trying to seek the Republican nomination for the presidential election in 2024. He has now been informed that he is the target of an investigation, and as we just heard in that report, that's a legal term, a judicial term, which is pretty significant. So what happens next? I mean, do you expect an indictment to follow?
I wouldn't be surprised, though, again, I think the Presidential Secrets Act charge is among the weaker of the cases that have been following Donald Trump, and it will be difficult for the Justice Department to indict him and not to invite Vice President Joe Biden, now president, who also had documents when he wasn't president of the United States and while he has been president of the United States at his residence in Delaware and other properties, including a garage next to his prized Corvette. It's difficult, even if the level of documents seized are different, and the fact that Biden voluntarily opened up various places for search, the charges, the crimes are essentially the same. The charge, the breaking of secure documents or maintaining them after you left office. So I think it creates a little problem for President Biden. For Donald Trump, it's sort of business as usual. Every prosecutor that attacks him or that indicts him is part of a witch hunt, and there is a base of his voters that believe this. In some ways, with some primary Republican voters, this emboldens him. He will be in Georgia this weekend speaking at the state party convention. He continues to receive loads of free airtime from outlets like CNN that had another town hall for him yesterday. And it's harder for the other GOP candidates other than Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida to gain attention, traction, and fundraising. So this, in some respects, actually helps him.
Bill, speaking of Georgia, there is also a case in Georgia where you are right now. He's facing charges of interfering or meddling in the outcome of the 2020 election. I mean, how serious is that?
Yeah, I think it's both serious and more troubling, along with the January 6th committee findings regarding the attacks on our U.S. Capitol building during the certification of the Electoral College votes, where in both cases there is pretty clear evidence that the president had direct knowledge of attempts to overturn a lawfully held election. Here in Georgia, there's multiple instances of him on audio tape speaking particularly to our Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, asking the Secretary of State and his staff to just find 11,700 votes to change the outcome of the state of Georgia and move its electoral votes into his column. I personally think sedition and overturning lawful elections are much more serious than some of the charges Donald Trump has been wading through these past few months.
Melik Abdul, as Bill just reminded us, President Trump, former President Trump, claims he is the victim of a witch hunt by Democrats and that he is being politically targeted. He points out, as Bill reminded us as well, that President Biden, when he was vice president, also had classified documents in his possession after he left the Obama administration. There was an Axios poll that was done not so long ago, and it showed that the majority of Americans approve of the indictment in a previous case involving Stormy Daniels, but a plurality says politics is involved in this. So what do you make of these legal challenges?
Well, I think it's on the one end, I think it's important to point out that's from a lot of the legal experts, Jonathan Turley, Professor Jonathan Turley of Georgetown, Andrew McCarthy, and a number of others. They believe that on the two charges, there was the obstruction of justice, as far as the records case, that there was the obstruction of justice component of it, but also the records violation itself. And it seems as if, at least if you listen to them, that they think that Donald Trump, if he will be indicted, that it will be on the obstruction charge. I think that this is something, Bill is right, this is something that would ultimately help Donald Trump. If you look at even the discussion of the indictments back in December in the Monmouth University poll in New Hampshire, Ron DeSantis was leading Donald Trump by double digits. Well, look at what the numbers are now. Donald Trump, his numbers, depending on which poll you look at, Donald Trump is about 40 points ahead of Ron DeSantis. So this is something, these indictments, there are a lot of people, I'm sure, who already have a problem with Donald Trump and who will see this as problematic. And it will be further reasons for them not to support Donald Trump. But as far as his base, and I wouldn't even just say it's base. I talked to many people here in Washington, D.C., who look at the Stormy Daniels case and say, not too sure about that one. And even in this obstruction of justice or records violation case, they do look at that a bit differently than what's happening in Georgia. Whether or not Trump is ultimately indicted in Georgia, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised at this point, since it seems as if that the Department of Justice, if you think about the Mueller investigation that came up with nothing, the recent Durham report, there's a lot of ammunition that the federal government and many of Trump's opponents have given many Trump supporters to believe that there definitely is a witch hunt against Donald Trump.
Eleanor Clift, former President Donald Trump is indeed far ahead in the polls for the Republican nomination, but notwithstanding his legal issues, what are the political implications of what is essentially a Democrat-controlled Justice Department going after the candidate who's most likely to going to go up against President Biden in 2024?
I'm going to quote former Attorney General William Barr, who served under Donald Trump, who said recently that the former president could have avoided all this if he had simply turned over the documents once he was asked to return them. Instead, he hid them, he concealed them, he lied about it, he defied a subpoena. So as the other panelists pointed out, there's a case here of obstruction. His attorneys met with the special counsel last week, and I think they're trying to convince the special counsel that if he brings charges, to make them civil charges and not criminal charges. Jack Smith, the special counsel, is a highly respected prosecutor. He's investigated and prosecuted war crime trials. I don't think he's going to be scared off by the politics. So you've got to set the politics aside and anticipate that this decision will be made on the rule of law. And you have a number of other cases that has been pointed out. And I think you have all these people crowding into the Republican field under this assumption that Donald Trump at some point is going to simply implode, or people are going to peel away as they understand the severity of the charges being brought up against him. I mean, one trial on his finances is set to take place in March of next year. So this is an evolving story, and how it's going to play out with the voters, I think we can assume that he will retain a strong base within the Republican Party. It won't be a majority. It's not a majority now. It's a plurality. But it's very difficult to see how he could win a general election in this country. And I think Republicans are going to start weighing that and are going to be interested in some of these other candidates if they anticipate that there could be more troubles ahead for Donald Trump.
Eleanor, what about the point that Bill brought up, and that is Vice President Biden, when he was vice president and after he left office, also had classified documents in his possession?
Yes, and Mike Pence had documents in his possession, and he was just recently cleared by a special counsel. As soon as Biden became aware of this, he returned them. And so there's no obstruction there. This was not a willful taking of documents. And I think what the special counsel, Jack Smith, is looking at is motive. Why did Donald Trump take apparently 300 documents with classified markings on them in dozens of boxes? It appears that he may just want them for bragging rights. There's a phone recording surfaced several days ago where he's kind of waving around a piece of paper and saying it's the war plan to bomb Iran that was submitted by General Milley, who chaired the Joint Chiefs. He likes to kind of show off. But is there something more nefarious? I mean, I can't answer that. With anybody else, you would think maybe there is something nefarious. With Trump, maybe it is just, bragging rights so he can show off to his rich friends what he's taken from the White House. I don't know, but that's why we have a special counsel examining this. And what he recommends is going to carry a lot of weight with the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. And I assume it's going to carry a lot of weight with the American people, because they're gonna explain if they charge the president, the former president, they're gonna explain why.
Rafael Bernal, I want to turn to a voting rights case in Alabama. There was a surprise decision by the United States Supreme Court, which has ruled that the Alabama State Congress violated the Voting Rights Act, which is a law that was designed to guard against race discrimination in voting. They have asked the Alabama state now to go back to the drawing board on this particular law. What is the significance of that, and how could it affect what is called redistricting when constituencies are drawn up in the country in each state?
Well, it's a huge significance, especially because the same Supreme Court, at least under the same Chief Justice, took away a lot of the teeth that this Voting Rights Act had originally, that sort of forced many states, especially southern states, to get their redistricting, all their voting laws essentially verified by the Department of Justice to avoid any of this kind of situation where there was racial discrimination. Now, in the United States, it is absolutely legal to redistrict favoring one party more than another, and through what's known as cracking and stacking, basically a population that is, say, 40-60 division between one party and the other, the assembly can make it so that a much larger majority of elected officials belong to one party. So it is legal for political reasons. it's illegal for racial reasons. So this decision by the Supreme Court shows that the way Alabama drew its districts favored Republicans for racial reasons, and they're being forced to change it. Now, by changing that will obviously favor Democrats, not too much, because there is a Republican majority in Alabama. There is a white majority in Alabama. In fact, no state except for D.C., which is not a state, has a black majority population. But it can affect other states, especially in the South, that have large, very underrepresented black populations. And many of those states might be concerned right now, especially Republicans in those states might be concerned about the viability of their maps drawn after the 2020 census.
Melik Abdul, Mike Pence, the former vice president, he has now launched his presidential campaign, and no sooner had he done that, he went immediately on the attack against his former boss, Donald Trump, and said that Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election render him unfit for office. Let's listen to what former Vice President Pence had to say.
On that fateful day, President Trump's words were reckless. They endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol. But the American people deserve to know that on that day, President Trump also demanded that I choose between him and the Constitution. Now voters will be faced with the same choice. I chose the Constitution, and I always will.
So, Melik, former Vice President Mike Pence there, that was a reference, of course, to the events on January 6th at the United States Congress. Is that stand that Pence is taking going to win him votes, given a pretty firm lock that Donald Trump has on the party's base?
No, I don't think that, and it's not even so much as Donald Trump, it's Mike Pence himself. Mike Pence, maybe for many Republicans, maybe many of those establishment Republicans who were more comfortable with Mike Pence, the evangelicals, a lot of them are comfortable with Mike Pence. But when you look at the entire stage for Republicans are doing much better than what Democrats are doing, because the Democrats don't even have any options in 2024 other than Joe Biden. And I don't think that they're going to let our debate Joe Biden at all. But I think Mike Pence has said this before. If you listen to his testimony, he has said this before. So I'm not surprised that Mike Pence is saying this. I am a bit surprised that one of the things in Mike Pence, in his speech on yesterday, Mike Pence said that Donald Trump and Joe Biden have the same position on entitlement reform. And I thought that was a very interesting approach for Mike Pence to take, because they don't have the same position. And so it was a cheap shot. And what I started thinking was, is the purpose of Mike Pence to serve as one similar to what Governor Christie has already articulated, that he would be the attack dog. He would be the ramrod against Donald Trump. And I'm just wondering, is Mike Pence is he also maybe part or unwittingly or not, part of an effort to move Donald Trump out of the race and hope at some point, as my colleague said, that at some point these indictments will, hurt Donald Trump's chances and he won't ultimately be the nominee, and somehow they could rise. But I think that Mike Pence doesn't have a chance winning the primary. I would be surprised if he wins any state at all at this point, but I don't think he's doing himself any favors at this point coming after Donald Trump.
Right. Bill Crane, what is your view on that?
I think Mike Pence was a good governor of Indiana, decent vice president, but he's too vanilla to take out Donald Trump. I agree with my fellow panelists that there may be a strategy within the GOP primary to have attacks coming from Donald Trump's right and left during the primaries that he enters with pluralities, in hopes of winnowing away enough votes to allow some of the other members of the field who are polling second, third, and fourth, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, to make up some ground, get some delegates, and go into a contested convention with Donald Trump either being indicted or under trial. But if you look at this growing field, the governor of North Dakota, the county that I live in, has more registered voters. There's no base there. Asa, the newest candidate, who I think filed yesterday or the day before, who was the youngest attorney general, I think, when is his claim to fame. I don't even know his bio. So as the field gets wider, the math gets tougher for anyone else in the field to pile up a plurality or even come in a strong second. Unless, of course, there's an active trial.
It is a big field on the Republican side, Bill. There are 12 candidates in the battle for that race right now. Just something that occurred to me, do you see a scenario or a circumstance, given the legal problems that Donald Trump has, which could render him ineligible to run for office?
Federal convictions or him being in prison would make him ineligible. But other than that, he's a United States citizen over the age of 35, and an indictment isn't a conviction. And quite frankly, if you're Donald Trump, the possibility of being elected and then being invulnerable to a lot of criminal charges might be a major incentive to continue to run, particularly when he's running on other people's money and not largely his own.
Okay, Eleanor Clift, let's look at the Democrat side. And at the moment, President Biden is not being challenged. And let's look at what's happened recently. I mean, there was the debt ceiling debate. There was a deal, and many see that deal as a win for President Biden. A lot of analysts feel that there was a compromise, but the compromise fell in his favor. But his approval ratings are still around 40%. And we know that the majority of Democrats want somebody else to run. But he believes that in a face-to-face race with Donald Trump, he is unbeatable. Do you think that's the case?
Well, first of all, a majority of Democrats who say they would like to see someone younger and with more vigor say that if Joe Biden is the nominee, they will vote for him. And Biden often says, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And if the alternative is Donald Trump, you have a clear contrast between extremism and bipartisan normality. Joe Biden has accomplished more with a very narrow majority, working with the other party, bipartisan legislation, some Democrats only legislation. He managed to even get the first gun safety legislation in 30 years, and negotiating his way through the debt ceiling in a way that gives him a clear win. There are no, I mean, you have people maybe on the far left of the party who wish that he could have accomplished more, but even Bernie Sanders, who ran as a progressive against Biden and certainly against Hillary 4 years prior to that, is now part of the team. So Biden's politics and his issues are not the issue. I think the Republicans are going to make a lot about his age, and I think he says watch me, and clearly he's an older man, but I think that he goes into this next election with a strong platform and a party that understands what's at stake. And so I don't think you're going to see any big fights trying to challenge Joe Biden, which is unusual for the Democrats. You would think one of these aspiring governors would be out there, but anybody who has a credible claim to the presidency is not going to step in and try to ruin things for Biden. And so I think you see incredible unity on the Democratic side.
Rafael Bernal, listening to Eleanor there is one name that we're hearing more and more often, and that is Robert Kennedy Jr., of course, the son of the former Attorney General Robert Kennedy and the nephew of John F. Kennedy, the president. He now has 20% support among Democrats and Democrat-leaning respondents in one survey. But how do you rate his chances?
Well, his chances aren't great, frankly, but the name recognition is indeed a problem for many Democrats. Let's remember the last time primary sort of sunk a president trying to get reelected, it was his uncle, Ted Kennedy, primarying sitting President Jimmy Carter. And I don't think Democrats have fully forgotten that. But there is a very big difference between Ted Kennedy and Robert Kennedy Jr. A lot of Democrats who know him don't like him because of his very controversial and sometimes directly contrary to science positions on a lot of things, but especially vaccines. He's seen as somebody non-serious by many people who know his positions, but that name recognition, it's slightly uncomfortable for Biden. But as Eleanor said, there's no real challenge to the president from the Democratic side right now.
Bill Crane, the progressive activist and academic, Dr. Cornel West, he has now announced that he will be running for president under the banner of the People's Party. Let's listen to him.
In these bleak times, I have decided to run for truth and justice, which takes the form of running for president of the United States as a candidate for the People's Party. I enter into quest for truth. I enter into quest for justice. And the presidency is just one vehicle to pursue that truth and justice, what I've been trying to do all of my life.
So, Bill, there is concern among Democrats that once Dr. Cornel West enters the race, that he could take away votes from President Biden in the general election. I mean, is that a valid concern?
Ask Al Gore about Ralph Nader in 2000. If Ralph Nader had not been in the race, Florida would have gone to Al Gore, not George Bush, and Al Gore would have been president of the United States. In close contests, and I would expect if we have a rematch, which I'm still hoping we don't have, every single electoral vote matters, and every single state in thousands popular vote matters. So if a third-party candidate receives 2, 3, 5% of the vote, or more than that in more progressive states, say like California, it can be very damaging, just as in the case of the race between George Bush and Bill Clinton, Ross Perot's third-party candidacy and his 11% of the popular vote cost George Bush a second term in the White House, George Bush Sr.
Right. Eleanor Clift, I've just got less than a minute left, but how big a worry is this for Democrats?
I don't know that the People's Party is going to get on the ballot in all 50 states. I mean, there are hurdles that the two-party system has deliberately put in place. I agree it's going to be a very tight election because we're a closely divided country. And again, I go back to Democrats understanding what's at stake. And if the former president is on the ballot again, and the threats that he poses to democracy and to the rule of law, I just think this is a serious election, and it's flirting with third-party candidates. This is not the time. Bigger threat comes from a group called No Labels, which is talking about holding a convention in Dallas in April of next year and having a ticket with a Republican and the Democrat. Problem they have is these are who are these people going to be? And but I think there's concern about that.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.